Hello, everyone. I'm Hal Levy once again, and I'm joined today by Miriam Sheril, who is head of product in the US at Form 3. We're happy to have you and welcome.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
A few weeks are left before real-time payments are here, really, and timely. FedNow is on the horizon. We're going to be discussing a few things, the concept and execution of intelligent routing, and what it means to ensure FedNow's success out of the gate and over the long term. So let's think about this. It is, let's call it here. It's been much anticipated. Uh, so as FedNow becomes reality, what are your thoughts? Why is the timing now correct? And why is it really an opportune moment to introduce real-time payments here in the US, where we've seen it really take root elsewhere in the world?
Yeah, and I will say to your starting point, we do have real-time payments right from the clearinghouse. So it's not that it's new here. FedNow, I think, will catalyze the industry, and I'll explain a little bit why. And of course, I'm slightly biased just because I worked at the Fed and I worked on FedNow before joining Form 3. That being said, our RTP is doing well, and they kind of set a baseline. And why banks have not joined that network, lots of theories out there. Honestly, it doesn't even matter at this point, right? It just, the reality is they've got about 300 banks, and we need way more than that to get to ubiquity and to drive a network, because you have a chicken and egg situation starting anything new, right? It only matters and only becomes important when everybody's on it. Nobody really wants to join it till it's important. So you do this dance, and we haven't seen RTP get past that 300 banks adoption number. So with FedNow, whether it's because it's a Federal Reserve system, so there are, lots of banks who have kind of shared that feedback that they really want to join a Federal Reserve, rail with central bank money and all of that. Or if it's because, like, my personal theory is we have two rails for every other payment type. We have two high value systems, we have two ACH systems. So maybe it only feels real when there's two instant payment networks. Right now, it's like, okay, wait, this is real. This is going to be real infrastructure in the US. Either way, I do believe that we're going to see a larger adoption once FedNow goes live. So we've seen the announcements of who's kind of certified and who's going live. You see a lot of the banks who are already on RTP, especially those big banks who are senders. So that's a good sign, right? That they're already seeing this resilient need to be on both networks. And then you have lots of banks that are paying attention. And I do think still waiting. I think it's July, but they're just waiting for it to turn on and not kind of blow up. Once it turns on and we have banks join, I think many other banks will start that journey and start joining. And it is an opportune time. So if you haven't done RTP yet and you're just looking at this brand new, there's two opportunities right in front of you. The first is you can join both at the same time, and you can specifically look at solutions out there. Form 3 is one of them that does this from that angle. Like it's one instant payment, right? At the end of the day, if I'm sending you money because we're sitting in a bar and having a drink, which is my favorite example, because when else do you want to send money? You don't care. FedNow, RTP, like, honestly, you don't even know the difference. So as a bank, if you're doing this now, you can do it once if you choose a vendor who kind of makes it agnostic. Hey, it's an instant payment. We give one API. It works for RTP and FedNow. Behind the scenes, we deal with those differences. So banks who haven't done RTP yet and are looking at FedNow going live can kind of kill two birds with one stone. And then the second piece, and I'll stop rambling in a minute. I should have warned you that I talk a lot. The second piece is it is low risk right now. So I talked about that chicken and egg, the network effect, but in reality, soon, in a few years, especially when adoption grows, you're going to have tons of payments over these networks. It's 24/7. It's going to be hard to make fixes. It's going to be hard to have to do a modernization effort. But right now, it's a little lower risk. So there is low volume. The adoption has to grow. So if you try to do this now, you can try to do it differently. You can do it with more modern solutions that maybe you wouldn't be comfortable doing on your FedWire system. But you can really try to go for a more modern, future-facing solution in this low-risk kind of atmosphere of lower volume payments, which is why right now, FedNow's about to go live. You do it this year, next year. It's really an opportunity. Okay, I'm stopping.
Let's talk a little bit about, to your point, scaling into this. Let's say cautiously. All right, there might be a wait and see approach depending on the use case or who's getting involved. But when you start to think of a logical roadmap? You gave the example of people sitting in a bar and doing this, right? Low value. I don't want to say low stakes because nobody likes when their payment isn't done correctly. But let's say, is there a natural progression to your mind where we get from the person sitting in a bar transacting with a peer or a friend or paying for drinks toward a scaling into, that person also works somewhere. Maybe they can start to envision, hey, we can start to port over our business payments in a certain way to faster payments. Is there a natural progression that you think would we'd start to see with FedNow, or maybe might even have been informed with RTP as a precedent? And what does that look like?
Yeah, and again, two angles to this question, right? There's that network effect. So it's going to be really hard to see huge growth until you have more banks on the network, because you think about some of the stuff you just mentioned, payroll, right? When are we going to see payroll potentially move to this network? It's a big one people talk about because it's all driven by businesses who want to do something different or change something or get that edge, right? So payroll companies who want to be able to offer to employers, do you want to offer a payroll that can pay every day, right? People don't want to wait 2 weeks anymore. It's a different type of economy. Do you want to pay out every day or instantly? You have the Uber driver example everyone uses, right? They want to get their pay. But really, that only works if every Uber driver's bank can receive those payments. Otherwise, you're stuck in this like, well, I'll do it if you're on this bank, but if not, it goes the other route. So you need all the banks on. You need to get to ubiquity for a lot of those use cases to move over. And they'll start, but again, they'll do it with this kind of logic of like, if then yes, maybe your money will move. When everyone's on the network, then everyone's payments can go out that way. Other business things that we're hearing about that are going to change this, like real estate is a huge one because it's a environment where nobody wants work-life balance. And so all they want is to close their deals on the weekends. Like they want to stop waiting in the closing room because the wire cutoff is too close. And so they're all excited and pushing for their banks, especially these real estate company, hedge fund companies. They want to be the ones who can close deals on the weekends, that you don't have to, finish on Thursday and then you're not going to get your money till Monday. They want to say it's Sunday and you close the deal. Great, we'll close today. So I think as those businesses start shifting into, we want weekends, we want nights, we want to stop worrying about the wire cutoff time, then you're going to see more and more use cases move over. The bar example that I love, just because like honestly, when do you think about like splitting bills? That's really P2P, right? And so there is a bit more on that with like a directory and such that has to be built out in the ecosystem to make that really feasible. Obviously, we have Zelle. So there's that, concept of like, is Zelle going to end up going over FedNow and RTP? But I do think we're going to slowly get there. So back to your original question with the logical kind of way we'll get there. Banks will join and they will join as receive only first. The big banks will join to send also, but a lot of banks are going to start with receive only, which does help because once you have all 9,000, 10,000 banks receiving these payments, then someone like the Treasury could potentially move tax refunds over, right? Or a large bank that does payouts to across, the 9,000 other banks can move their use cases over. You've got the Venmo PayPal payouts. To your point, RTP already kind of set the stage. That does go over the RTP network, but only if the receiving bank is on the RTP network. And so it's got to kind of grow. That network effect has to happen. FedNow will go live. I believe we'll see lots of banks start joining, especially as receive only. And as you see more and more banks going, we're going to see more and more use cases start to move over onto these rails. And then you'll just do that climb, right? Like more volume, more adoption, more volume, more adoption.
I wonder, I'm going to throw out um, maybe the conventional wisdom, which is eventually we'll get to a utopia where everything's instant all the time. Everything's, 24/7, 365 to your point a moment ago, it can be. But I'd love to get a sense for you as this scales, would there still be room, should there still be room for some of the entrenched ACH wire, the traditional conduits that have been with us for decades, you know, um, they still might have a use even with
Yeah.
real-time ubiquity. I'd like to get your thoughts on why that might be. Is it a threshold of the dollar amount in the transaction? Is it the industry? Is it really a coexistence that with a little bit of caution in the mix, maybe this type of transaction doesn't lend itself well to instant and really should be done. To your point, send something on a Thursday. It's okay if it gets there and settles on a Monday. What do you think?
Yeah. So can I say all of the above? All of the above. Easiest.
Yeah.
No, it is a bit of all of the above. First of all, I don't think any of those rails are going away. And to your point early on, we haven't seen that happen in other countries. So if you look at, FPS in the UK, Form 3 does a lot of business with FPS. I think we have like half the volume, but so we peeled back the onion on that. Backs didn't go down. So it's not like, and Backs is UK's kind of ACH, version. Payments went up in total. I 100% think that's going to happen in the US. Like, I don't think we're going to cannibalize wire or ACH. I think payments in general is going to go up. So things will shift over and then more payments are going to happen. Weekends, like I just talked about, there are no weekend payments now. There will start being weekend payments. That doesn't mean that everything else is going to go away. But then to your point, so it's a combination of things. Dollar limit's one. So the dollar limit, RTP has 1 million and FedNow has, 500,000 to start. So you're not going to see all of wire, right? You're not going to see a penny under $1 billion payments over these networks. But there are wires. Think about your typical wire payment. You bought a house, it's your down payment. That's under, well, I guess I don't know what house you buy, but for me, that was under $500,000. So that can move over this rail. Will it? It'll probably take time again with the network effect. Probably there'll be options, especially if it's a lower cost. So I had to do my wire. I paid $25. This is going to cost me less. I'll do it. And then there's other aspects to this. So there's those, things. ACH, retail payments, yes and no. So there's a huge ecosystem built around ACH payments. There are vendors, solutions, and stuff throughout every aspect you can think of, from bill payment providers and, integrations that private companies can do directly into those systems. And so it's really, really well established. We're not going to see tons of movement until you have that kind of ecosystem around instant payments, FedNow and RTP. There's some of that being built. It's why Form 3 came to the market now, actually, because we feel now is the time to start as a kind of new provider who's doing something different, more modern, better. But if you talk to banks who are on RTP, many of them will share they feel that's what's holding us back right now. There's not enough out there to allow private companies and fintechs and others to really participate in this. And until that's there, end users, consumers, businesses are limited in how much they can do. So as we go, I'm going to sound like a real broken record with this network effect concept, but as that grows, those opportunities become lucrative opportunities for people to build, for businesses to grow. Then we'll see those solutions come out. Then all of a sudden, bill payments will move over, right? Everybody's focused on RFP and could it help with bill payments? Bill payments will only move when there's enough banks on the request for payment solution doing that messaging, and there are solutions built around it working. Then people can move their bill payments over, right? The last one, I guess, to your point, some things will never move. So to your point is like, it's okay to get there on Monday if you got there on Thursday. Even more, maybe it's preferred. Maybe there's a liquidity aspect to this. There's money that someone's making off of the money that hasn't moved yet. And that's going to be weighed against consumer business demand to get their money instantly. And that might not always win. So sometimes it's going to be better to say, no, I don't want that money to move instantly. My whole business model is built around that money not moving instantly. Those use cases will never move over.
I think it's a great point. Some business models are based on the float, and that's important. Let think about this then. To have the functionality in place to move money instantly, desires some technological ability, and I'm going to use the term here, intelligent routing, which means an optimal state of making the payment work, but also making sure it's as cost effective and certainly, the word I'm going to introduce here is fraud free as possible. So let's talk about the concept and execution of what it means to do intelligent routing in a world that's getting ever faster. The old saying too, faster payments equals faster fraud. Okay. So tell me about intelligent routing and what it means.
Yeah, I actually thought the word you were going for before was interoperability, but I was like, oh boy, that topic. But then you went for fraud. I will actually start with interoperability a bit. When it comes to intelligent routing, I do feel our first use case is really this reachability between the two schemes. So there's been lots of discussions around the fact that RTP and FedNow won't interoperate, meaning you can't send your payment on FedNow and receive it on RTP or vice versa. Can't do that on wire or chips either. So there is a similar kind of rail concept like this, but in that case, you can have banks that it can hop between, and you can't do that on FedNow and RTP. So if you look at that from a bank's perspective, it kind of sucks. It's like, well, now I have to go build two systems. But here's the opportunity. Again, back to what I said earlier, these are brand new payment rails. You can do things differently. You don't have to build by yourself two solutions that you yourself, Bank Miriam are going to use. You can look at service providers who have built it and are building you one integration into that point. So intelligent routing, solves interoperability, right? If you use Form 3 as an example, use our API, you initiate the payment. You don't have to care if the receiver bank is on RTP or FedNow. Intelligent routing in any company that's offering this type of feature will do that check for you. If the receiver's on RTP and that was your preference, we'll send it over RTP. If they're not on RTP or they've signed off of RTP, we'll send it over FedNow. And so it kind of takes the pain point away from a bank saying, I need to know where this payment's going and what rail it's going on. I'm just going to send you a payment. You figure it out, which gets to your other point, right? I started with the RTP FedNow. I think that's the easiest use case. But to your point, this could be really taken further apart across the different rails. I can say as a bank, I have a payment. I would like it to go to Hal. Here's how I would like it to go to Hal. Cheapest way, fastest, whatever my preferences are. And what intelligent routing would do is say, okay, that's a payment. Based on the criteria that Hal set up, or that Miriam set up in this case, I'm going to send it over FedNow. Oh, wait, Hal's not available over FedNow. Okay, I'll try RTP. Not available there either. Okay, I'll go to FedWire. Or maybe my preference was, no, I want that kind of irrevocability, fraud and sanction screening and stuff that comes with wire. So I'm going to send the payment, and the first thing, it's going to go to wire first. Only if wire can't work, then it'll go to FedNow. So intelligent routing is really about letting banks care less about which rail they're sending their payments through, and just that they want to get their payment through based on certain business preferences.
Your point about interoperability is an important one. I think it's an aspiration. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, how do various payment schemes around the globe start to link up to do some of this, right? Because one thing would be for cross-border payment to be improved immeasurably through this. I'd love your thoughts there. If we could talk a little bit about not just interoperability in terms of a goal, but really the connectivity that needs to happen to broaden it enough so that the landscape of yeah, I'm going to use commercial payments, but certainly, as you know, there are all number of use cases too. What does it take to get there, and when might we get there, do you think?
When might we get there? It's going to be a guessing game. But you're totally right. If you went to any payment conference, even 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when RTP was just starting off, like I remember going to Money 2020, like, okay, I'll age myself, a long time ago. The use case everyone talked about was cross-border. So when everyone's like, we need faster payments, we need instant payments, the US is behind. They were always talking about cross-border payments. It was about getting money to family or friends overseas. Obviously, baby steps. You can only do cross-border if you have domestic. It's not like you can just start with cross-border, and we'll get there, right? There's already been work by RTP on IXB that they've kind of shared, and they've been piloting. There's something that came out from the ECB in SEPA Instant. They're kind of looking at their leg of it if there was a cross-border transaction. So I do think we'll get to cross-border. I think that the different instant payment schemes across the different, across the world really will start interacting and start coming to kind of agreements on what this looks like. There's a lot that goes into it. There's technical, because at the end of the day, the payment's supposed to be me to you in 20 seconds or less. It's a little complicated to try to do that between like domestic and then cross-border and different systems having to settle on different times and hours. But it is doable. It obviously will mean certain regulations and rules change, or they become specific to like cross-border instant payments. We can't get there. Honestly, I don't think there's even value in getting there until we get a little closer to ubiquity here. So if we do it, but we only have 500 banks on the network, it doesn't really service the whole economy, right? It's not going to service the use case of people who want to get money home to their family. They're not on those, top banks. And so we have to get to like the 9,000. We have to get to all the banks here and then have that cross-border, model in place so that we can get money back and forth. So if you asked me to guess a time frame, I will not. I had suggested 5 years to someone and they were like, what? It better be 3 years. I think it'll be 5 years, but it's,
In 5 years, we may be replaced, you and I, by AI robots that are having this discussion. But let's be a little more optimistic. Let's talk a little bit. It occurred to me you have a vantage point that's a little unique here. Actually very unique. So you have a career path that has taken you through the Fed to your present role here. Can you give me a sense of maybe some of the insight you may have, not just from the Fed's point of view of having come to market for this, because clearly you were there while this was germinating, and what lessons do you think have come through the pilot program? So you mentioned certification at the top of the call, and certainly at your current vantage point in the provider technical broader view of it versus the previous role where you were at the Fed, having mashed the two together, what do you think some of the lessons, I'm going to use the word cautionary lessons might be, but what do you think maybe some of the more optimistic findings maybe as well? Where do you go with both of those?
Yeah, I would say just a personally having worked at the Fed and then going to kind of private sector and a venture-based, new company, I've just learned a ton. It makes you realize what you didn't know that you thought you knew, or you didn't even know you didn't know. So like you go, it's a totally different vantage point, which I've loved. And part of the reason I made the switch was from the FedNow experience, actually the pilot experience, and I think the pilot was fabulous. It was basically the Fed admitting, right, we don't know. Like, we don't know everything. We don't know how banks think. We don't know how vendors think. We know what we know, but clearly we don't know it all. So let's see who would be willing to participate and inform us. That's what they did. It's 120 plus participants across banks, service providers, vendors, all sorts. And there was sessions every so often where we would present, and we being when I was at the Fed and others at the Fed would present the solution, what we're thinking, how we're planning, and look for input and feedback. And I will say I was at the Fed for like 13 plus years, probably the most collaborative I've seen, where the feedback wasn't just like, okay, we checked the mark, we got feedback. We listened and we heard and we thought like, okay, especially banks and vendors who are out there for RTP who have already been learning for 5 years. Like, let's learn from that, right? Let's get all that feedback. And then for me personally, even having sat through that and heard all that feedback, then I went and did it myself. And I was like, oh, I see the point now. Now I get it. Like you kind of get it now, why it's so hard, why everyone's not just jumping up and adopting instant payments instantly, for lack of a better word. It's harder than it seems. It's harder than it seemed to me when I was at the Fed. The collaboration and the input that was gotten, I think, was huge. So that helped inform a ton of the work. The fact that they're going to go live in July, you've already seen some of those who have announced that they're joining. So you've got banks who are on RTP, you've got some banks who aren't, you've got these service providers who are certified. There'll be some tinkering, in my opinion, again, not the official word of the Fed or Form 3, but in my opinion, that's going to inform a lot when you have to do this live in production, especially having those who are on both networks. Where did we get it wrong? Where does it not align enough? Where does it align too much? That interoperability concept, is it working? Can we route between the two? There'll probably be a lot of learnings and tinkerings and quick fixes. But I truly think the pilot set that stage for this to be done right and to be done for the masses, not, okay, we put in a system and it supports 10 banks and that's it. This is really done across the entire industry with lots of financial institutions of all sizes input.
That's a great point for us to stop. This is geared toward the masses and over across. You know, it's a different world. It's not specialized in terms of use case or users. And to your point earlier, you've got to get that tipping point with the banks. So not a few hundred, but a few thousand, and then we'll see where we are in due time. Miriam, I want to thank you for the time. And thank you for the conversation, and look forward to doing it again.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Okay.